You're exhausted and you don't even know why. You wake up, you do what you're supposed to do, you handle your responsibilities, you keep things moving. But deep down, something feels off. Your mind doesn't rest. A small message can shift your entire mood. One comment can stay in your head longer than it should. You try to move on, but your thoughts keep pulling you back, over and over again, like you're stuck reacting to everything instead of actually living your life. And if you're being honest, it feels like you've been running like this for a long time. But here's something most people never stop to question. What if the problem isn't your life, but the way your mind has been trained to respond to it? Because long before modern psychology tried to explain stress and overthinking, Stoic thinkers were already studying this exact struggle. Marcus Aurelius lived in a world filled with chaos, pressure, and constant uncertainty, yet he built a mind that remained steady in the middle of it all. Not because life was calm, but because he learned how to stop reacting to everything that tried to control him. If these conversations speak to something real in you, something grounded in truth, philosophy, and inner growth, consider subscribing. It's a small gesture, but it helps us reach more minds like yours, and it quietly signals that you're walking this path with intention. Lesson 1. Take back control of your mind. Most people spend their entire lives trying to control things that were never theirs to control in the first place, and that's exactly why they feel constantly overwhelmed, frustrated, and mentally exhausted without even understanding where that exhaustion is coming from. You wake up thinking about how people perceive you. You go through your day reacting to what others say or do, and by the time the day ends, your emotional state has been shaped more by external events than by your own decisions. That is not control. That is dependency. Think about it carefully. How much of your stress today came from things you actually had power over, and how much of it came from things you were trying to control but couldn't? Someone's tone, someone's opinion, a situation that didn't go your way, something that happened in the past, something that might happen tomorrow. These are the places where most people invest their energy, and these are also the places where they lose it. The Stoic shift is brutal but liberating at the same time. You draw a clear line between what belongs to you and what does not. Your thoughts belong to you. Your actions belong to you. Your discipline belongs to you. But other people's behavior, their opinions, their moods, and the outcome of external events do not belong to you. And the moment you accept that fully, not intellectually but emotionally, your mind begins to quiet down in a way that feels almost unnatural at first. This is where real control begins. Not in forcing the world to cooperate with you, but in mastering your internal response to whatever the world throws at you. When something happens, instead of immediately reacting, you pause and ask yourself one simple question: is this within my control? If the answer is no, then you release it. Not because it's easy, but because holding on to it gives you nothing in return except stress. And here's where it becomes powerful. When you consistently redirect your energy back to what you can control, your effort becomes sharper, your decisions become clearer, and your emotional state becomes more stable. You are no longer scattered across 10 different things you can't influence. You are focused, grounded, and intentional. Over time, this builds a kind of mental strength that is hard to break. Situations that used to overwhelm you start to feel manageable. Things that used to trigger you lose their intensity, not because life got easier, but because you stopped giving your power away. So from this moment forward, make it simple. Control your thoughts, control your actions, control your response, and let everything else exist without trying to carry it. Lesson 2. Turn every problem into fuel. Your default reaction to problems is the same reaction most people have, and that's exactly why most people stay stuck. Something goes wrong, and your mind immediately labels it as negative. You see it as an obstacle, a delay, a frustration, something that shouldn't be happening. And in that moment, you mentally resist it, which only makes it heavier. But here's the shift that changes everything. What if the problem is not the problem? What if the way you are seeing it is the problem? Because every obstacle carries something inside it. Information, pressure, friction. And those things, when used correctly, are exactly what builds strength. The problem is not designed to stop you. It is designed to shape you. But you can only use it that way if you stop fighting it and start working with it. Imagine this in real life. You're dealing with a difficult person who constantly tests your patience. Your instinct is to get irritated, to react, to feel disrespected. But if you shift your perspective, that person becomes your training ground. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to strengthen your emotional control. Instead of seeing them as a problem, you start seeing them as practice. Or think about failure. When something doesn't work, most people internalize it as proof that they're not capable. But if you strip away the emotion and look at it clearly, failure is feedback. It shows you exactly what doesn't work so you can adjust. And the faster you accept that, the faster you improve. This is what it means to weaponize your obstacles. You don't just endure them, you use them. You extract value from them. You turn them into something that pushes you forward instead of something that holds you back. And when you start doing this consistently, something powerful happens. You stop fearing difficulty. You stop avoiding challenges. Because now, every difficult situation is an opportunity to grow stronger. You become resilient in a way that most people never reach because you are no longer trying to avoid pressure, you are using it. Lesson 3. Stop complaining immediately. Complaining feels harmless, but it is one of the fastest ways to weaken your mind without realizing it. Every time you complain, you reinforce a mindset of helplessness. You train your brain to focus on what's wrong instead of what can be done, and over time, this becomes your default state. Think about how often people complain about work, about traffic, about people, about small inconveniences that don't actually matter. It becomes a habit, almost automatic, and while it might feel like a release in the moment, it actually drains your energy and keeps you stuck in the same cycle. The Stoic approach is different. It's not about pretending things are perfect. It's about removing unnecessary emotional noise from situations. When something happens, you look at it as it is, without adding frustration on top of it. You either deal with it or accept it. There is no middle ground where you sit and complain without taking action. This requires discipline because complaining is easy. It gives you a temporary sense of relief without requiring effort. But real strength comes from choosing a different response. When something goes wrong, instead of speaking about it, you pause, you process it internally, and then you decide what needs to be done. If it's something you can fix, you act. If it's something you cannot control, you let it go. And in both cases, you conserve your energy instead of wasting it on words that change nothing. Over time, this builds a powerful habit. You become someone who doesn't react emotionally to every inconvenience. You become someone who stays focused, who adapts quickly, and who moves forward without getting stuck in negativity. And here's the interesting part. When you stop complaining, you start seeing things more clearly. Problems become simpler, solutions become more obvious, because your mind is no longer clouded by constant negativity. So try this as a challenge. Go one full day without complaining. Not out loud, not in your head, not even subtly. Just observe what happens. You will start to notice how often the urge comes up, and by resisting it, you will begin to build control. Because at the end of the day, complaining doesn't change your situation. It just keeps you in it longer. Lesson 4. Stay in the present or suffer. Your mind has a habit of leaving the present moment without asking for your permission, and most of the time, it doesn't go anywhere useful. It drags you back into the past, replaying mistakes that cannot be changed, or it throws you forward into a future that hasn't even happened yet, creating scenarios that feel real but exist only in your imagination. And while this is happening, your body reacts as if those things are happening right now, which is why you feel anxiety even when nothing is actually wrong in front of you. If you observe your thoughts closely, you'll notice that most of your stress is not coming from what is happening, but from what you think might happen or what already happened. You are carrying emotional weight that does not belong to the present moment. You are trying to solve problems that are not here yet, and you are revisiting situations that no longer exist. This is where the Stoic discipline becomes incredibly practical. You bring your attention back to what is real, to what is in front of you, to what you can actually act on right now. Not tomorrow, not yesterday, right now. When you do this, something interesting happens. The overwhelming feeling begins to shrink. The situation becomes smaller, more defined, more manageable, because the truth is, you can always handle the present moment. What you cannot handle is 10 imagined problems stacked on top of each other in your mind. Imagine you have a task that feels stressful. If you think about everything connected to it, the future consequences, the potential failure, what others might think, it becomes heavy. But if you narrow your focus to just the next step, just one action, the weight drops immediately. Now it's something you can handle. This is how you train your mind, not by eliminating thoughts about the past or future completely, but by refusing to live inside them. You acknowledge them, and then you return to the present. And this takes repetition. Your mind will wander again. It will try to pull you into unnecessary stress. But every time you bring it back, you strengthen your control. Over time, you begin to experience something most people rarely feel: calm in the middle of activity, clarity in the middle of pressure, because you are no longer trying to live in multiple timelines at once. So when your mind starts racing, bring it back. Look at what is actually in front of you. Ask yourself what needs to be done right now, and do just that. That is how you reduce chaos. Lesson 5. Expect people to be flawed. One of the biggest reasons people lose their peace is because they expect others to behave in ways that align with their own standards. You expect honesty, consistency, respect, and fairness, and when people fall short of those expectations, it hits you harder than it should. But the truth is, people are unpredictable. They are emotional, inconsistent, and often driven by things you cannot see. They act based on their mood, their past, their insecurities, and their current state of mind. And if you expect them to always act rationally or respectfully, you will constantly feel disappointed. This is where a simple but powerful shift comes in. Instead of expecting people to be perfect, you expect them to be flawed. Now, this doesn't mean you accept bad behavior or allow people to disrespect you. It means you remove the element of surprise. When someone acts selfishly, you are not shocked. When someone misunderstands you, you are not deeply affected. You see it as part of human nature rather than a personal attack. This protects your emotional stability, because when you stop expecting perfection, you stop reacting to imperfection. Imagine someone cuts you off in traffic. If you expect everyone to drive perfectly, that moment triggers frustration immediately. But if you already understand that people make mistakes, that they are distracted, impatient, or careless, then the same situation loses its emotional impact. You notice it, but you don't carry it. This applies to deeper situations as well. Relationships, work, friendships. When people fail to meet your expectations, instead of reacting emotionally, you evaluate the situation clearly. You decide what you tolerate, what you don't, and how you adjust your behavior moving forward. This creates a different kind of strength. You are no longer reacting to people's flaws. You are prepared for them. And because you are prepared, you remain calm. At the same time, this mindset also makes you more aware of your own flaws. It keeps you grounded. It reminds you that just as others are imperfect, so are you. And this balance prevents you from becoming overly judgmental or disconnected. So instead of expecting people to always act right, expect them to act human. Observe their behavior without being pulled into it, and respond based on clarity, not emotion. That is how you protect your peace in a world full of unpredictability. Lesson 6. Separate facts from stories. One of the most damaging habits your mind has is turning simple events into complex emotional stories. Something happens, and before you even realize it, your mind starts building a narrative around it, adding meaning, assumptions, and conclusions that were never actually part of the original event. The problem is, once that story is created, your emotions react to the story, not to the fact. Let's break this down. Imagine someone doesn't reply to your message. The fact is simple. They didn't respond. But your mind quickly creates a story. Maybe they're ignoring you. Maybe they don't respect you. Maybe you said something wrong. And now your mood changes, not because of what happened, but because of what you imagined. This happens constantly in everyday life. A look, a tone, a delay, a comment. Your mind fills in the gaps with assumptions, and those assumptions create emotional reactions that feel real, but are often completely unnecessary. The Stoic approach is to strip everything down to the facts. What actually happened? Not what you think it means. Not what it might lead to. Just what happened. When you do this, the situation becomes much clearer. Without the added story, most problems become smaller. They lose their intensity. They become something you can observe instead of something that overwhelms you. This requires awareness, because your mind will automatically try to create narratives. It's what it does. But once you start catching it in the act, you gain control over it. The next time something triggers you, pause and separate the fact from the story. Say it clearly in your mind. This is what happened. And then notice everything else your mind is adding on top of it. Once you see the difference, you can choose not to engage with the story, and this is where your power comes from. Because when you stop reacting to imagined meanings, you stop creating unnecessary suffering. You deal with reality as it is, not as your mind exaggerates it to be. Over time, this makes you calmer, more rational, and more in control of your emotions. You stop jumping to conclusions. You stop overthinking small things, and you start responding to situations with clarity instead of confusion. Lesson 7. Build your inner fortress. Most people spend their lives searching for peace in the wrong places, and without realizing it, they make their calm dependent on their environment. They believe they will feel better when things slow down, when the situation improves, when they finally get a break, when they escape the noise. So they look for quiet places, distractions, or temporary relief, hoping that something outside of them will fix what feels unsettled inside. But the truth is, wherever you go, your mind goes with you. You can change the environment, but if your mind is chaotic, the chaos follows. You can sit in a quiet room and your thoughts will still race. You can go on vacation and your worries will still find you. You can disconnect from everything and yet still feel restless. This is why external solutions rarely create lasting peace. They only pause the problem. The Stoic approach is different. Instead of trying to control the outside, you build something inside that remains stable regardless of what is happening around you. You create what can be called an inner fortress, a place within your mind that is calm, grounded, and unaffected by external noise. This is not something you find. It is something you build. And like anything that is built, it requires consistent effort. You train yourself to sit with your thoughts instead of running from them. You create moments of silence where you are not distracted, not entertained, not stimulated, but simply present. At first, this feels uncomfortable because you are not used to being alone with your own mind without escape. But that discomfort is part of the process. Because when you sit in that space long enough, something starts to change. Your thoughts slow down. Your reactions become less intense. You begin to observe instead of immediately engaging. And gradually, you create distance between what happens and how you feel about it. That distance is your strength. Over time, this practice builds a kind of internal stability that does not depend on circumstances. You can be in a stressful environment and still remain calm. You can face pressure and still think clearly. You can deal with difficult people without losing your balance. This is what makes the inner fortress so powerful. It is always available. It does not rely on external conditions. It does not require the world to cooperate. It is something you carry with you at all times. And once you have it, you stop needing constant escape. You stop looking for peace outside because you have built it within. Lesson 8. Stop caring about opinions. If you look closely at your behavior, you will notice how often it is influenced by what others might think. You adjust your words, your actions, even your decisions based on how they will be perceived. You hesitate before speaking, you second-guess your choices, you replay conversations in your mind, wondering how you were judged, and over time, this becomes exhausting. Because you are not just living your life, you are managing an image of yourself in the minds of others, and that image is something you can never fully control. The reality is simple. People will form opinions about you no matter what you do. Some will like you, some will misunderstand you, some will judge you unfairly, and none of those things are within your control. Yet most people build their identity around trying to influence those opinions, which creates constant pressure and insecurity. The Stoic shift is to remove that dependency. You stop placing your self-worth in the hands of others. You stop measuring yourself based on approval or rejection. You begin to define yourself by your own standards, your own actions, and your own values. This is not easy, because the need for validation is deeply rooted. It is tied to belonging, to acceptance, to the desire to be seen positively. But the more you rely on it, the more unstable your sense of self becomes, because it is constantly shifting based on external feedback. When you let go of that need, you gain something far more valuable. You speak more honestly because you are not filtering everything through fear. You act more confidently because you are not waiting for approval. You make decisions based on what is right for you, not what will be accepted by others. Letting go of others' opinions does not mean you ignore everyone or become careless. It means you choose carefully whose opinions actually matter. You listen to those who are wise, those who are aligned with your values, those who genuinely want your growth, and you let everything else pass without attaching meaning to it, because most opinions are just noise. They come and go, they change quickly, and they rarely reflect the full truth. So instead of carrying that noise with you, you let it exist without absorbing it. And when you do that consistently, you become more stable, more focused, and far less affected by the constant judgments that once controlled you. Lesson 9. Stop thinking, start becoming. One of the biggest traps people fall into is believing that understanding something is the same as becoming it. You read about discipline, you watch videos about mindset, you learn about self-control, and for a moment, you feel like you've made progress. But then, nothing changes. Because knowledge without action creates an illusion of growth, not actual growth. You can understand every principle of mental strength and still react emotionally in difficult situations. You can know exactly what you should do and still choose comfort instead. And that gap between knowing and doing is where most people stay stuck. The The Stoic approach is brutally simple. Stop preparing, start acting. You don't become disciplined by thinking about discipline. You become disciplined by doing things that require discipline. You don't become calm by understanding calmness. You become calm by practicing control in real situations. Every moment is an opportunity to reinforce who you are becoming. When you feel the urge to react, that is your chance to practice control. When you feel resistance, that is your chance to act anyway. When something is difficult, that is your chance to build strength. And these moments are not rare. They happen every day. The problem is most people ignore them. They wait for the right time to change. They wait until they feel ready. They wait until it becomes easier. But real change happens in the opposite way, and through that process, you become someone different. This is how identity is formed, not through ideas but through repeated actions. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, you reinforce that identity. Every time you follow through, you strengthen it. Over time, it becomes natural. You no longer have to convince yourself to act. It becomes who you are. So stop waiting for motivation. Stop collecting information. Stop telling yourself that you will start later. Lesson 10. Do what you're meant to do. Every single day starts with a decision, and most people lose that decision before they even fully wake up. The alarm goes off and immediately your mind begins negotiating with comfort. You feel the warmth of the bed, the ease of staying still, and a quiet voice tells you that you can delay just a little longer, that you can take it easy today, that you can push things forward without consequences. And in that moment, it feels harmless. It feels small, but that moment is more important than it looks, because that is where your direction is set. When you choose comfort in that moment, you are not just choosing to stay in bed. You are reinforcing a pattern. You are teaching your mind that resistance is something to avoid, that effort is something to delay, and that discipline is optional. And once that pattern is established, it carries into everything else you do throughout the day. You hesitate more, you delay more, you act with less urgency. But when you interrupt that pattern, when you get up despite the resistance, something shifts immediately. You begin your day from a position of control instead of surrender. You are not waiting to feel ready, you are acting anyway. And that action creates momentum that carries forward. This is not about waking up early for the sake of it or forcing yourself into unnecessary discomfort. It is about understanding that your life is built on small decisions repeated consistently. The way you start your day reflects the way you approach everything else. If you hesitate at the beginning, you will hesitate later. If you act immediately, you build a rhythm of action that becomes easier to maintain. The Stoic mindset is clear on this. You are not here to be endlessly comfortable. You are here to act, to build, to contribute, to move forward even when it is difficult. That does not mean you never rest or that you ignore your limits, but it means you do not let comfort dictate your actions. Think about it this way. Every time you choose action over comfort, you strengthen your ability to do it again. Every time you delay, you make it harder to act the next time. So the goal is not perfection, but consistency. You keep choosing action again and again until it becomes your default. Over time, this builds something powerful. You become reliable to yourself. You trust that when something needs to be done, you will do it. And that trust removes hesitation because you are no longer questioning whether you will follow through. So the next time you feel that resistance, especially in the small moments, recognize it for what it is. It is not a signal to stop. It is a signal to act. And when you act anyway, you take control of your day before it has a chance to control you. Lesson 11. Remember you will die. There is one truth that has the power to cut through almost every unnecessary worry, every hesitation, and every meaningless distraction in your life. And it is the one truth that most people try to avoid thinking about. Your time is limited. Not in an abstract way, not in a distant future, but in a very real and unavoidable sense. One day, everything you are worried about right now will no longer matter. The conversations, the opinions, the small frustrations, the things that feel urgent but are not important, all of it will fade. And when you truly understand that, your perspective begins to change. Most people live as if they have unlimited time. They delay what matters. They hold on to things that don't serve them. They avoid difficult decisions because they believe there will always be another opportunity. But that assumption creates a kind of slow drift, where days turn into weeks, weeks into years, and before they realize it, time has passed without intention. The Stoic practice of remembering mortality is not meant to create fear. It is meant to create clarity. When you remind yourself that your time is finite, you start to see things differently. The small annoyances lose their importance. The need to prove yourself to others becomes less urgent. The fear of judgment begins to fade. Because you realize that spending your limited time worrying about things that do not truly matter is a cost you cannot afford. Instead, your focus shifts to what is real, what matters, what you actually want to build, experience, and become. You begin to ask different questions, not what is easy, but what is meaningful, not what will people think, but what actually matters in the long run. And these questions guide your decisions in a way that removes unnecessary hesitation. This awareness also changes how you handle conflict and emotion. When something triggers you, you pause and consider whether it is worth your energy, whether it will matter beyond this moment. And most of the time the answer is no, and that realization allows you to let go much faster. At the same time, it pushes you to act where it matters, to stop delaying important conversations, to stop avoiding growth, to stop waiting for the perfect moment that may never come, because the perfect moment is now. And when you live with that awareness, you stop wasting time. You become more focused, more intentional, and more aligned with what truly matters. You do not rush through life, but you do not drift through it either. You move with purpose. All of these lessons come back to one simple truth. The world will always be unpredictable. People will always behave in ways you do not expect. Situations will change, plans will fail, and challenges will appear when you least want them to. That part will never fully go away. But what can change completely is how you experience it. You can continue reacting to everything, letting each moment pull you in a different direction, constantly adjusting your state based on what happens around you. Or you can build something inside you that remains steady no matter what happens outside. And that is the real goal. Not to control the world, but to control yourself within it. Because when you can do that, everything becomes different. Stress becomes manageable, challenges become opportunities, other people's behavior loses its ability to disturb you, and you begin to move through life with a kind of calm strength that is not easily shaken. This is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is something you practice every day, in small moments, in difficult situations, in choices that seem simple but carry long-term impact. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you build control. Every time you act instead of delay, you build discipline. Every time you choose clarity over emotion, you build strength. And over time, those small choices become who you are. So take these lessons and use them, not all at once, but one at a time. Apply them in real situations, test them, adjust them, and keep building. If you've made it this far, you already know this is not just information. This is something deeper, something you can actually use. There's another video on your screen right now that will take you even further into mastering your mind and building real inner strength. Watch it and keep going. And truly, thank you for being here and for being a part of Stoic Mind.